Global trade is in the news a lot at the moment, you may have noticed, with US President Donald Trump questioning and even upending the order of globalization that we've known for the last few decades. However, many economic historians would argue that the rules-based order of trade, as we've known it, has lifted billions of people out of poverty and delivered economic prosperity globally. Many would also argue that it has a social value beyond this economic benefit, whether that's the crossing of values and ideas and information across borders, or the bringing more people into the global economy. To discuss this and more, I am delighted to be joined by our UK Public Affairs lead, Grace Thompson, and the CEO and founder of Cambio Consultancy, Ptashko. Grace, great to see you again. Grace, first of all, can I ask, do you agree with the sentiment that global trade over the course of perhaps our lives has had a broadly positive social impact on the world?
Oh, thanks for the question, Will. It's obviously a very important one. And I would say from the very basic concept of trade providing a way of understanding other cultures and providing goods very simplistically across the world to places that wouldn't usually be able to access those goods or services, there's lots of good to be had from the basic level of trade. And then obviously the bigger concept of trade agreements and agreements between blocs preventing wars and generally maintaining peace. There's a big picture social value to be had from trade. Obviously as well, businesses which trade internationally are more profitable, more innovative, more resilient, employ more people. And that good also flows around to the communities that those businesses are part of too. However, what I will say as a bit of a balance to that is that we have got a way to go, in terms of issues such as sustainability. Sustainable aviation fuel is obviously an area where we could be improving, getting more planes to make use of that so that goods flying across countries cause less emissions. And of course, we really need to do more about forced labour in supply chains. And we have seen the UK Parliament talking a lot more about this recently. So whilst, as I said before, there are many positive things in terms of economic empowerment for communities, there are areas where we need to do more in terms of improving the value of trade to communities in those areas.
And Peter, do you kind of broadly agree with that kind of quite balanced response from Grace? And to what extent should businesses and policymakers themselves be thinking about incorporating social value into their strategies?
That's a great question. Of course, in the UK, we incentivise that social value piece. And I think, of course, it's that old cliche, we've been on a journey with trade, haven't we? It is a velvet glove. It's an opportunity to deployment, to connect. And I agree with Grace on that. For me, sustainability is a really nebulous concept. I work with it every day. So I have a take on what Cambio does in this space. We focus very much on people, social change, community, the S of ESG, if you like, and then the governance. How do we deliver that? And so trade is a form of delivery. It's a vehicle for delivery. But I like to put that emphasis on people and the impact that trade has on people's lives around the world. As a consultancy practice, we work in the UK, but we work internationally. A lot of what we do is service delivery. We're developing some online AI-enabled products at the moment, but a lot of it is service delivery. And so the barriers to trade are a little bit less for us. But we recognise the importance of opening conversations. And I recognise at the moment there are clearly a lot of challenges around the world in terms of how do we adopt sustainable practices, and Grace has listed some good examples of that. We're considering expansion into the Middle East, and there are challenges around sustainability there, but also principles of DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. And as a founder, an LGBTQ plus founder, who cares about equity and inclusion very much, I'm a big believer in going there, having the candid conversation. You've got to start those conversations, you've got to be in the discussion. I'm well aware that we live in a world with very strong opinions, very strongly held, whereas I have very strong opinions, very loosely held. I'm prepared to engage in candid conversations with people in trade. It's just a wonderful vehicle to break down barriers, I think. What we must avoid, however, is putting up real trade barriers. So a world in which we see unpredictability, uncertainty, and tariffs is a world that is more insecure and more likely to be prone towards conflict. So that is a concern I have with the current state of affairs.
And actually, Peter, just thinking about what you were saying to do with like the societal aspect of this and trade agreements with, Middle East, etc.
Yeah.
I'm thinking back to before the previous administration came in, where they were talking about provisions in trade agreements to do with protecting groups and chapters for women, but also ESG provisions specifically in trade agreements. So I'm wondering how much we'll see that in future trade agreements that are coming out.
Yeah, absolutely. And also looking at the diversity of the types of businesses that we're engaging.
Yes.
Yeah, I had a really engaging conversation with representatives of the Welsh government earlier on today about not just diversity in the representation of trade missions, but frankly also the representation of the types of businesses that you see. So the sectors they're working in and the size of business. And frankly, a lot of that is still too traditional. It still represents parts of the economy that have been established for a long time. I think for Britain to be out there in the world in a really meaningful 21st century sense, we need to be fully representative of the types of businesses that we work with. So micro businesses, social enterprises, B Corp, as much as the diversity of the founders of those businesses and the people that are the front-facing element of it.
Yeah.
The use of the word open, I think, is really important. So we talk about open trade a lot, but also the openness to other ways of doing business, of other cultures and other ideas as well. Really important. Receptiveness is another word which comes up. Peter, you've touched on it a little bit there, but you've worked with a range of organisations on social values internationally. I think UNCTAD is one you've worked with, but also in the UK, banks and universities and so on. Can you say a bit more about that work?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean, we work across 3 different verticals. So we work very much in the social economy with emerging businesses that are looking to create social change in their communities. It's very community anchored, community based. A lot of that is happening across the UK at the moment. We have a really strong network, I would say, ecosystem of small businesses in the UK, full stop. And you and the listeners will know that. Increasingly, they are represented strongly by what I would call socially motivated businesses. Some of those will be social enterprises, some of them will be B Corp. But somewhere in there, they've layered in sustainability principles, let's say, and things like the UN Sustainable Development Goals are a key framework for that work that we use all the time. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is what I call intermediaries and capacity builders. So foundations, international networks, universities. The UN obviously is a great anchor representative of that. And I have worked with UNCTAD previously on what this looks like across a European perspective. But working with those intermediaries that still have access to great networks, great funding and support, the challenge is getting the pipeline right and getting access to pipelines. So a lot of our work is connecting the dots between those intermediaries and the people that really need the funding and support. I was, again, speaking to an incredible founder of a business who is looking to provide sort of sanitary products to sub-Saharan African countries. And they've been hit hard by the cuts to US aid. In reality, they were expecting, I believe, about to the order of about £1.5 million worth of pre-orders that completely fell through in January. So that's taken a significant hit to them as a business, but also, of course, a significant impact on the beneficiaries that would have benefited from those sanitary products. So there are some real challenges at the moment, but intermediaries provide some of the solutions. And by that, I mean, of course, the foundations, grant funders, and investors, frankly, and the investor community that's ready and raring to help.
Grace, just how much of a threat is the Trump administration and its current policy agenda to some of the things we're talking about here in terms of future social value and trade?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I should probably start by saying, as we all know, that things change day by day, week by week with this administration. However, with what we've got so far, I think perhaps one of the things that concerned me the most was the funding cuts reported last month to the WTO. So the US pays obviously quite a lot into the WTO, at least historically. And the WTO has a number of groups, particularly supporting underrepresented groups. Got their Trade and Gender Working Group, they've got the MSME Working Group, they've got their Gender Hub, all of which do great work and which we've supported through various programs in the past. And I think the reduction of that aid is already starting to have ramifications for those programs of support on a global level. And I think, similarly on a global level, we talked about DEI, it's not just affecting US companies. Last month, again, it was reported that the administration wrote to different European suppliers along their supply chains, anyone who's kind of in contact with businesses in the US, saying that they had to adhere to the same DEI ban that other US companies are subject to. So, it's not just something that's isolated in one part of the world, it's having ramifications all over.
Finally, Grace, the Chartered Institute is itself a charity. Our charitable remit is to talk about the social value of trade as being a force for good in the world. And indeed, we are in our 90th anniversary, and I think there's going to be a campaign around this. So could you say a bit more about that campaign?
Yes, of course. This is quite an exciting campaign, actually, because we wanted to do something to mark our 90th anniversary and to really reflect on the support that we've been able to give to businesses over the years, but also reflect on the fact that we, as Pete said, we're in a very difficult time right now, and we need to be advocating for trade as a force for good, as something that's positive, as well as I was saying earlier, not being complacent and making strides forward as well in the areas where there are still some issues. So what we're doing with our campaign is essentially giving businesses the chance to become trade champions with the Chartered Institute. You can get in touch with us at an email address, which is 90@export.org.uk. And essentially what that trade champion badge or accreditation does is highlight that you are part of a mission to promote trade as a force for good. Yeah, please do get in touch with us if you'd like to be part of that positive move for good.
Terrific. Well, thank you, Grace. That sounds a great initiative. Thank you again for joining us as ever. Thank you as well, Peter, for joining us in our Westminster offices. It's been great talking to you both.